go. All right, so this is my character rig. This is what we finished at the last class period, right? I have set this up. You watch me set it up, but I've set this up to where I should be able to get all of the animation I need out of this character just with those three controls, right? If I hide the mesh, those three rings, I should be able to just use those to get everything that I need to animate on this character, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that all of my mesh is on its own layer. So again, if you don't remember how to do that, grab everything. You can create a new layer, or if you already have an existing layer, you can just right-click on that layer and say Add Selected Objects. Okay, so now everything is in this layer, including that ground plane that was hidden. And I can turn the visibility on and off with that, but I can also click this little button out here until it says R. And now I don't accidentally select it, right? So that's beneficial because what I'm really wanting to be able to do is just grab and select these three controls, right? So you remember when we were talking about the history of animation, we talked about pose-to-pose animation, right? So do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So pose-to-pose animation is, we usually use that in terms of 2D animation. Well, so far in this class we've talked about it in 2D animation. But what that really means is that we are defining key moments in an action by their pose, right? So if a character's jumping, like there's the neutral pose, there's the squat pose, there's the push off the ground pose, there's the up in the air pose, there's the contacting the ground pose. And all of those are key elements of that motion, right? All of those things are crucial for us to actually explain that motion visually. And so that's one of the reasons I want to be able to just select all of my controls, is because pose-to-pose animation means we are going to think of every one of these poses as a drawing, right? So when I set a keyframe, like let's say I want to animate my character doing some, I don't know, crazy action, right? I select everything, all of the controls, all three of them there, right? And hit S, right? And so that means they all have a keyframe. I don't know why I'm in negative 100 here. Let me set that to 0. That means they all have a keyframe on frame 0, right? And so if I wanted to have her do whatever, some sort of, jump kick or whatever, I can change all of these different controls. I can pull her up, pull her foot control up, pull this other foot up. All right, I can have her, go into a kick. There we go. Like this. And all of the controls are going to move, right? So if I grab all of those and hit S, I know that there is nothing I can do short of changing this pose on those keyframes that will ever mess that up, right? And so I now know exactly what this is always going to look like on frame 0 and frame 10. I have those two poses defined, right? And so when we think of pose-to-pose animation, that's what we're doing, right? Now, by default, Maya is going to try to figure out those other 8 keyframes, right? I guess other 9. I got 0 and 10. Maya's going to try to figure out 1 through 9. And it's going to do a very poor job on it. Yes? Oh, Alt space. M. Arrow. There you go. So I'll say it again on this video just so people can remember it later. If you have some window that's off screen and you need to pull it back on, it's Alt space, and then that's going to turn on your menu. M for move, and then hit your arrows, and you can drag that over. So I'll kind of show you with another window here. I'll open up my graph editor, right? And so let's say this was off screen. It currently isn't. What I can do is Alt space, and that chooses my graph editor. M for move, arrow. Well, sorry. Let's try that again. Alt space, M, arrow, and now it's stuck to my mouse, and I can just drag that in and click, right? So that's a nice tool. So again, all of these controls are what I'm posing. And so we do this so we are completely in control of those key poses. And when I set a keyframe on them, I've nailed down all of those controls in that position, right? However, Maya is going to try to figure out this stuff in between, and it's not going to look like a kick, right? Like, that doesn't look like a character jumping up. Like, for a character to jump up for that kick, we need another pose, right? So maybe I want my other pose to be closer to what's on 0, right? And so I can anticipate down with the hips so the character can jump up in the air, but start pulling this foot up earlier, right? And maybe even adjust the toe, right? And so really, grabbing all that, hitting S, really pose-to-pose animation is just refining these different poses until the character looks like it's actually doing that action, right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete these keyframes. Just wanted to show you this really quick. This is why I am setting this up to where I only want to be able to grab those controls, right? I should be able to completely pose this character just by manipulating those 3 controls. So that brings up the question of what poses do we need for a walk cycle? Now, if I asked you what poses you need for a character getting a box of cereal out of the cabinets, apparently I'm in cereal mode this semester, or what pose do you need for Garfield kicking Odie off the counter or whatever, right? Like, those are very specific actions, right? There's a very specific way that Garfield might do that. There's when it comes to picking the cereal out of the cabinet, maybe you're sleepy still yet. Maybe you had to wake up earlier than usual and like you're trudging to get the cereal out of the cabinet. Or maybe you're super excited because you love cereal, right? Like, there's so many different answers to that. There's no canned answer to which poses you need. So how do you find that out? Like, how do you find out which poses you need?
I guess you do the most exaggerating and like demanding of your character's poses, and then.
So it's a good idea to push those poses, yeah. But like, what resource could you use to find out how a character would do that, or how a person might do that?
Video for references, like you did with the cows.
Yes, video references, like the cows. And thankfully, you all have a really high-end camera in your pocket right now. At least high-end enough to capture a video reference. But literally, that video I just shot was for the cows was HD 1080 at 240 frames a second. And I got this phone for free, like, because I signed a contract. Like, nobody has an excuse anymore in the universe to not be able to shoot some video reference, right? Yet, for some reason, that is the thing that seems to be the hardest for me to get students to do. And I realize it's because they don't like getting in front of a camera, right? A lot of people chose animation because they wanted to go into their little cave and work and not ever have to socialize or whatever. You don't like that spotlight sometimes. That is something we kind of have to get over. So if your character is doing something let's say you want your character to feel like they're all maybe they're dancing to music in their head or whatever. Shoot video of yourself doing that. Like, you are a reference. You don't have to look like this character. You don't even have to necessarily move like this character. I have video reference of me acting out a line for an elderly woman who's speaking, I believe it's Russian, right? And I use that as my video reference for animation work. You just have to be able to figure out what your body is going to physically be doing, right? we think we know what that looks like, but we don't always know what that looks like. So you all, for the most part, are probably capable of shooting reference of yourself walking, right? That's not always the case. Some people with disabilities or whatever reason, maybe you have a limp or whatever, and you want your character to not have a limp. All of that is fine, right? But we also have YouTube, right, which is a huge reference for all sorts of stuff. In fact, I'm pretty sure if I searched YouTube for a video reference of somebody walking, right, walk reference. There we go. Why, look at this. There are all sorts of other animators who have already shot reference video of themselves walking, right? In fact, there's one company that does it called Endless Reference. So let's watch some of that. Now this is, again, slow motion video. And I am going to use some of this video to talk about how a person walks, right? So the difference between getting a bowl of cereal or a box of cereal out of the cabinets and walking is that I could get that box of cereal out of the cabinets while standing on one leg. I could get it while, reaching behind me. I could, like, there's so many different ways of doing that, right? But really, there's only one way of walking. And it's because this is not a single action. This is a system of actions, right? It's like it's not that you can walk by just waving your hands to your side and suddenly you'll start walking, right? A walk is a very systematic set of physical actions that allows not only for you to stay somewhat in balance, but also to progressively move forward, right? And so in terms of animation, that means that a walk cycle can be broken down into some very similar key poses, right? So those key poses, there are actually 4 of them for any step, okay? And we call those contact, down, passing, and up. Okay, so let me show you these as we just sort of walk through this. Actually, it may go for it with me. So this is our contact pose, right? We call it our contact pose. Why? Why do you think this? So both feet are contacting the ground. What were you going to say?
I was going to say roughly that too.
Yeah, so really we call this the contact pose because this is the point in which the front foot is contacting the ground. It is also coincidentally like one of the last points, not the very last, but one of the last few instances where the back foot is still on the ground, right? The thing about a walk is that your character has to always have one of their feet supporting their weight, right? So if I skip a little bit forward, we would call this the down pose. Why do you think this is the down pose? So 2 answers, but you're actually both right. Okay. So this is down because the character's foot is completely down, right? It's completely flat. And this is the lowest point in the character's hips, right? So your hips are kind of bouncing up and down as you move forward, right? Interestingly, at a very similar method to how a bouncing ball bounces up and down. Yes, I am Mr. Miyagi. That's why we talk about a bouncing ball. It's not because you have to animate thousands and thousands of bouncing balls. It's because the physics involved behind how a ball bounces is going to happen in all sorts of different animations you do in the rest of your life, including these hips, right? As these hips go up and down. So this is the down pose because it's the lowest point in the pose, right? And the foot is flat. Skip forward. Oh, he stopped walking. Let's find it again here. So we're going to move forward a little bit more here. Okay, so let's go ahead and go forward here. So there's the down. So we got our contact pose, our down pose. So we're going to call somewhere around here, right? This is our passing pose. Why do you think this is the passing pose?
Because one leg is passing the other leg.
One leg is passing the other leg? What are you saying?
I was saying the knees are passing each other.
So the knees are passing each other. What are the arms doing?
They're also passing each
They're
other.
also passing each other, right? This is where our arms and our legs are both passing from one side to the other. Now, this is worth mentioning. I know not all of you have a character that have arms, right? But when my character's left leg is forward, right? Which direction is the left arm? Is it forward or is it backward? Backwards, right? Our bodies counter each other. Now, the reason we do that is to stay in balance, right? If you tried walking like one side at a time, it looks really silly, right? Like this is very awkward. What we're doing is we're trying to keep our head as still as possible. And so we're absorbing all of that motion in our torso. We're twisting our torso as we walk, right? To keep our head sort of stable. And so that's why, that is something I see a lot in animations. People will do that the wrong way. They'll have their left leg forward and their left arm forward, but they're going to counter each other, right? So really what's happening is this is the passing point. This is where the limbs are passing each other as we're transitioning into the next pose. So far we have contact, down, passing. What was the third? What was the fourth one? Anybody remember?
Second contact.
Second contact. There's actually something before second contact. It's the opposite of down.
Up.
Up. All right. So the up pose is the highest point of our character's step. So here's something that's interesting to notice, right? In a walk cycle, what is really happening is you're throwing yourself off balance forward, right? Mm-hmm. So you start to tip over that front leg like you're going to fall forward. Now you'll fall all the way forward onto your face if you don't throw your leg out in front of yourself to catch yourself. So this up pose is that. Like this is the leap of faith of the walk cycle, right? This is him being like, I'm pretty sure I can get my leg out in front of me and I won't bust my nose on the floor, right? And so that is why that's the up pose. This is him tipping himself off balance going forward. A phrase that a lot of people use to refer to a walk cycle is a perpetual fall forward. And if we think of a walk, like that is what's happening. I'm throwing myself off balance, falling forward, and catching myself at the last minute, right? And so that's a way of thinking about this. This is him throwing himself forward, and he's going to catch himself again with the contact pose, right? So those four poses do not make up a walk cycle. Those four poses make up half of a walk cycle. And the reason for that is because all we have done so far with those four poses is get the character's right leg, in this case, from behind him, from the furthest back possible point to the furthest forward possible point, right? We've just made half of a cycle. So for that walk to complete, we need to do all of those four poses again. Contact, down, passing, up. How am I going to remember all of that, Greg? If you go to Google and type in walk cycle, right? It's going to take you to all this stuff about walk cycles. Click images, right? Well, there's all of those poses. Let me go forward again. So contact, low, passing, high. So, and people have slightly different names for it, right? So this is pretty ubiquitously understood amongst animators. This image comes from Animator Survival Kit. It's actually an altered version of the Animator Survival Kit's image. But you will see this. This is actually the cartoon animation version of it. Contact, recoil, passing, high point. I still just like contact down, passing up. Those are the easiest ways to recognize these. These 4 poses have to be present in all walking animations. In fact, these 4 poses are present in one way or the other in all locomotion animations. So a skip has a contacted down, a passing, and an up. A run has a contacted down, a passing, and an up. A side shuffle has a contact down, a passing, and an up. If your character is running backwards, if they're crawling on all 4s, they have contact down, passing, and up. This is practically a physics requirement for you to not fall on your face, is to have all 4 of these. So this means through years and years of research, somebody has done all of the reference for you. Still, a lot of times people do not put in all 4 of those poses. They'll put in the contact, they'll put in the passing, they'll put in the other contact, and they'll be like, I'm done. And it's going to look like your character is like trying to swim in the air, right? It's that down and the up that gives the walk weight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate my character walking forward through these 4 poses, right? I'm going to do both legs. So I'm going to do all the contacts. I'm going to do all the downs. I'm going to do all the passings. I'm going to do all the ups. So I'm going to do 2 steps. But the requirement for the assignment was 6, right? And so from there, I'm going to show you a trick on how you can make those 2 steps into 6 steps in just a few clicks, okay? It requires some precision, though, or it's going to mess up. So kind of bear with me, but let's go ahead and look at this. So what I'm going to do, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and put my character in kind of a neutral pose, okay? So she's very rigid looking right now. I mean, yeah, I know she's a robot, but like, look how perfect her toes are and everything. I'm going to go ahead and maybe shift her weight over just a little bit, maybe push her down just a little bit to get some knee bend, maybe rotate her back a little bit, just giving her a little bit more personality. Rotate that foot, maybe rotate the knee. And so once I have a little bit of something with some personality in it, or just some alternative like posing in it, right, I'm going to select all of her controls and hit S. Now, I'm going to show you another trick here. Sometimes, like, some of your controls are not easily selected, right? Sometimes you can't, because of how the rig is created, drag and select all of your controls. And some rigs you'll be working with later, some of your controls will be hidden during parts of the animation because you'll have literally thousands of them, right? So you don't want all of those visible at once. So I'm going to show you a quick little tool on how to select your controls by making a new button. Okay. So under custom, I'm going to just go here, and you'll see that this custom menu, in most cases, doesn't have very much stuff in it. So what we're going to do is, I'll kind of show you something here. Down here on this bottom timeline, see where it says Mel along the very bottom of my screen? I'll kind of resize this a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So along the bottom of your computer has this Mel line. All the way out here at the end of this is a little box, right? That little box is your script editor. So let's go ahead and open that up. So what this is for those of you who are a little bit more adept at scripting or programming. And so if you know Python, if you've taken some programming languages and you can write in Python, you can write scripts in here that actually do some really impressive stuff, right? If you don't know any of that stuff, that's okay. I'm going to show you how to create a script today without having to write anything, okay? So what I want to show you is, like, there's 2 different types of languages we can write in here. Mel, Python, right? I'm going to look at the Mel version. This stands for Maya's Embedded Language. So Maya has its own scripting language. More people are moving toward Python for the newer stuff, but in terms of what Maya has going on here, for the most part, Mel is the default, right? And so watch what happens when I select this control. Watch what happens to this area up here. And when I select this control, it makes a new line of code, and it says select -R hip control semicolon, right? So that line of code is actually the line of code we need to select the hips, right? So if I were to select this and paste it, Control C, paste it in here, right? Control Enter to run it. It selects the hip control. Okay, so that's good to know. But if I were to go in here and select all of these controls, you'll see that it gives me this other line of code. It selects -R, R foot control, L foot control, hips control, right? This will work no matter how many objects you select. It will give you that code for all of them, right? So let's say you have in your animation a bunch of models that you're selecting often, right? You can select, get that code for that as well, or that script for that as well. Well, once we know what that is, all I have to do is highlight it and then use my middle mouse button to drag that up to my my menu. When I release it, it's going to ask me what kind of script this is. It's a metal script. And so now I have a button there. And what that button will do is select all of my character's controls. So I can click that one button and it selects everything. Okay? So this is extremely handy. This is possibly one of the handiest tricks I've taught in this class. Because I swear, like, so much of your time when you get into later animations, like your character's hand alone will have 15 to 20 controls on it, right? And you may just want to be able to select all the fingers, and being able to quickly make a button to select those fingers is really handy. So what I have now, though, is this button that I can use to select that. So I've selected this. This is my starting pose. I'm going to now make my character transition into the first contact pose. So I have auto key turned on because I just like working that way. I'm also going to go ahead and turn on my grid just so I can kind of see where everything is. Right? And so let's zero that out. Zero out the knee. And so I'm going to be pulling this information from these images that I was looking at earlier. Right? In fact, I'll probably just pull these over on my other screen just so I can look at them. But the first one is the contact pose. Okay, so again, I'll go ahead and leave them here. I can flip back and forth. Again, with the contact pose, I want that heel to be contacting. This back foot, the toe is going to be pushing off. And then the hips are going to be right about in the middle height-wise. Right? So let's go ahead and move all of this forward, sort of get us that contact pose. Now for this to look right, my contact pose needs to be up on the heel on this foot. So maybe something like this. Right. And it needs to be pushing up on the toe on this foot. Now that's a little harder for us because if I just rotate my foot, the foot's kind of going backwards a little bit. Right. So I have to pull forward, raise it up, and then maybe raise my toe just a little bit. Now there are some rigs we can make that a little easier to do, that contact pose. It's harder to rig but easier to animate. And what you've seen that by doing that now, hopefully that toe sort of stays in the same place. All right, so if I skip forward, see how it kind of slides back just a little bit? I'll go ahead and scoot that forward just a little bit more. So it feels like that toe stays pretty much in the same spot, or about there, right? So if it slides around, we call that foot sliding, and it just kind of looks fake. So we have to be careful with that. So I'm going to scoot this forward a little bit more. And I'm going to make sure my hips are kind of centered over the x-axis here. I personally also like to give my foot just a little bit of an angle. I'll probably leave that one on like it is. And then I'm going to do a little bit with the knee here to aim it out as well. So again, select all my controls, hit S. And my character has sort of taken its first step forward. Right? I'm using the greater than, less than keys to do that step as well. So so we got one key pose. I will. I'll be honest with you. I think that a lot of people change their mind about wanting to be in animation when they realize how much time it actually takes to make these animations. Posing is one of the things that takes me the longest, but it's one of the things where you have the most control over how this character moves, right? So you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck by making sure this pose is perfect. So like looking at it right now, maybe I would even consider pulling your hips back just a little bit and up just to kind of straighten out that leg a little bit more. And then maybe moving this leg forward, making her stride just a little shorter, right? So like any of this that you're tweaking, like it's not time lost because what this is actually crafting this animation. This is how this works, right? So once I have this key pose though, I've actually done some pretty beneficial stuff because I know exactly what my next or what my last contact pose is going to look like as well. Because for this character to cycle, this pose has to be exactly the same, right? So there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. I want my character to be walking forward, right? So that means I need to know where she's going to be at the end of 2 steps. Okay? I use this kind of clunky workaround, which is I just make a box that lets me see the stride length, right? So maybe I will go to polygons here. You can use anything, box, cylinder. Create a box. I'm going to scale this thing out where it's long, right? And I'm going to try to make this the same length of her stride, right? So maybe, how about we do it from heel to heel, right? So if that's her heel, grab those, move that back there. And so now this box is about the same length of 1 stride for her, right? And so I know that this is the first stride. If I hit Control D and duplicate it, that will be about the second stride. Right. And if I hit Control D and duplicate it, that will be about the end of the last step. So really, I need this pose to be all the way out here at the end of this line for me to get 2 steps out of it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make my next keyframe the end of that step, which brings up the question, where is that keyframe on the timeline? Like, how long does 2 steps take? Anybody?
I don't know.
Go.
I'd say like 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
No, I mean to actually take 2 steps. Like, how many frames would that 2 steps take?
Like roughly like at 1.5 seconds.
Yeah, so it really depends on your character's speed, right? For me, it usually, like, if a brisk walk, like you're trying to get to work, is about 2 steps in a second, right? So a cycle a second. So how many frames would that be in here? A second long, 24 frames, right? So if you want your character to go a little faster than that, then maybe it's 20 frames. If you're wanting them to go a little slower, maybe it's 35 frames or something like that. But a lot of times I see these, they're just really slow. So I would probably err on the side of making this walk cycle a little faster. So I'm going to go out here to frame 34. Sorry. I'm going to go out here to frame 34, and that's where I'm going to put my second pose. And it's going to be this exact same pose, right? Except it's going to be all the way forward here, right? And so this is heel to heel. So I just need to get her heel right about there. Is that right? Put it back just a little bit more. Right. And that should be about the length that it takes her to go those 2 steps, right? So if I were to go to frame 22, right in the middle, that's about where we need that second step, right? So what I have now is my 2 contact poses, my very first one and my very last one. And that very last one has to be the same exact pose or it's not going to loop properly. So that's why I just did that, slid that whole pose forward, right? However, right in the middle on frame 22, that is the other contact pose. That's the contact pose where everything is reversed, right? Now, we actually know some information about this already. We know where our character's her right foot will be, right? Because it's already there in this pose. So I can sort of steal some of that information from this pose, right? So I'm going to go about halfway through there, frame 22, go ahead and hit S, right? Set a keyframe on that. And then from frame 10, I'm going to grab this foot control and middle click drag to here and hit S again, okay? So what that did is it kept that key pose right there, right? And so that's where that foot is pretty much going to stay throughout that entire walk cycle or through that entire range, right? So what I need to do is kind of get that flattened out a little bit. Yep. And then I need this forward motion not quite be as far forward. So that feels pretty close on that back foot, right? Her hips in the front, maybe rotate her just a little bit like this. And then this foot, I'm just going to put as far forward as I can to make the other contact, right? So now what we should have is both of our contacts, right? Contact, 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 right? And if we were to watch this, hit play, that's where a lot of people kind of stop, right? And that's not really giving us enough information about this walk cycle. So there's still a lot of stuff in terms of physics that's missing, right? So I've got my 3 contact poses, so I know the 3 places that my character is going to make contact. Which poses should I make next?
Passing.
Huh?
Passing. So it'd be about halfway between.
Passing, yes. I think so. Now, everybody works differently, but when we look at our contact, our down, our passing, our up, our contact, Maya is giving us a lot of information for free, right? In fact, if I go halfway between my 2 contacts here, it's going to give me something close to passing already. I just have to fix it, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's look at our passing pose. So if I go halfway between my contact and my next contact, it's going to be about frame 16, I guess, right? So we kind of already have the passing pose, right? But there's just a few things that are still missing from it. So I'm going to select everything, hit S. One of the things that's missing is like her toe is still up in the air, right? So I'm actually going to zero out that toe rotation. I'm also going to zero out my Z here. And maybe just a little bit of the X. Let's see what happens if I zero out X. There we go. So now our foot's pretty much flat on the ground, and we can see if that looks like it works. So that's working pretty good. That's not as well. Let me sort of rotate that a little bit. There we go. So we got our contact, our passing, Now, if we look at our passing pose, there's a couple of interesting notes about it. The support leg is straight, so that means the character's standing up pretty tall, right? Rotate a little bit, move the character up. Right? So the support leg is straight, but the passing leg is bent. Right? So it'll be maybe something like this. Take out that toe animation. In fact, you can do the opposite if you'd like. You can even drag the toe back a little bit, so it looks like it's sort of dragging forward there. Now, this is something that we'll see a little bit more from the reference, from the video reference. On our passing pose, right about, let's find it. Let's say right about, there. So look at him from the front view. Okay. This view over here. So what he is doing is, he's shifting his weight over that foot. Why is he doing that?
Center of balance.
Yeah. So if you want to know why he's doing that, stand up and try this with me, okay? So, anybody want to stand up and try this with me?
Let's do
All right,
it.
you got this. This will get us awake again, okay? Actually, I'll put this on camera too, so you can.
Please. Oh.
Okay. So, with your arms about shoulder width apart, okay? Sort of get your hips right between your 2 feet, right? Now, without moving your center of gravity at all, without shifting your weight at all, I want you to lift one of your feet.
I did it. Yeah, you did all of
How long can you do it? That's actually really impressive if you're really pulling it out. So you have to realize, how can you pick that foot off the ground?
This is really hard.
You have to shift your weight.
You have to shift your weight, right? So that is the thing, like, that's why it takes babies a year to walk, right? Like,
Nice.
because they can't figure that out.
We're not on the feet in the middle.
No, well, I mean, all that really is doing is just narrowing your center of like support, right? And so you still have to shift your weight a little bit. It's just not quite as much. So you can sit back down now. That is
Because I normally stand on my left leg.
well, it works with both legs, but that is something that an animator has to like beat into their head. Like, you can never ever ever lift one of your character's feet off the ground until you've shifted the weight over another base of support, right? So if we look at our robot here, like, she's kind of off balance, right? Her weight is still dead center, but that foot is the only thing holding her up. And so to make her more balanced on her passing pose, we have to shift her over just a little bit, right? And so maybe doing a little bit like that to get a little bit more of a decent passing pose, right? So let's look at these now. Again, we got contact, passing, contact, contact, right? So we need the other contact pose. We basically need the mirror of this. So I'm going to go about halfway through and do what I just did again, except with the other leg, right? So I'm going to zero this out in terms of the toe. I'm actually going to select all the controls. There we go. I'll also maybe zero out that rotation. What's that do? Yeah, that helps. I'll go ahead and raise this foot up in the air a little bit so we get that toe dragging behind. Right. And then I want to raise her center of gravity up a little bit and shift it over this leg. Okay. Again, select everything, hit S. So this is going to start feeling a lot closer. If I hit play now, like, that's starting to feel like a walk now.
Now you just gotta put the hip level.
So it's actually the hip up and down. So really the biggest thing that's happening right now, like, there is a little bit of up and down motion in that step, It's that we don't necessarily feel enough of the weight from that, right? So one of the things is like, look how slow her foot is going flat when she takes that step. It's like really gradual, right? And so it doesn't feel like she's absorbing that weight from the impact. So that's one of the things we'll put in next. That's what the down pose is for, so we can see that weight being absorbed. So that's going to be in between the contact and the passing. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and go halfway there. And again, where most of our pose is already there, right? I know where this foot is eventually going to end up flat because it's right there. So I can just middle click on that control for the flat foot, middle click and drag it back to here and hit S. Okay, so now that foot's going to flatten out quickly, right? The thing that is happening in that, though, is my character needs to be absorbing their weight. Like, their weight needs to be sinking into that foot, right? So I'm going to sink her into that just a little bit. Now, if we look at our walk cycle, there's a little bit of something that happens on this down pose. And it's that this foot is sort of kicking backwards a little bit, right? The thing you need to remember is that we're propelling ourselves forward, right? And so that requires us to be sort of kicking backwards and pushing ourselves forward. If you think of like walking on something slippery like ice, the reason we can't do that is because of friction, right? There's no friction on the ice, and so our foot would slip out from under us. So we're actually using a combination of gravity and friction as we push our leg backwards to drive our weight forward. Why that toe is kicking backwards is because the character is finally finished pushing backwards, and it's like it's slipping past, right? So we can get a little bit of a kick back here, and it's going to propel us forward a little bit more, or at least it's going to look like it does, right? Here we go. So on this back foot, I'm going to keep pushing it back, maybe kick backwards like that. Do a little bit of something with a toe to show us kicking backwards. Right. And so let's see how that looks. Does it look like she's sinking into that? Maybe exaggerated just a little bit. Let's see. That might be a little too much. I'm also going to make sure starting to move her weight over that foot. Right. So now it feels like that foot's kind of absorbing that weight a little bit more, right? And so what you'll notice is immediately after that, she starts pushing herself back up. And now we've given her a little bit of a limp. Right? So the reason we have limps, the reason we can tell that something is limping, is because the walk is asymmetrical. Right? So all a limp is you're doing something different on one side of your body than you are on the other. And that could be anything. It could be you injured your toe. It could be your knee is hurting. It could be your hip, or it could be you have a cut on your foot, right? Whatever that is, it's causing you to walk a little bit differently on one side than on the other. So that's something we'll start to recognize as we get more and more into this, is that we don't want our walk to be perfectly symmetrical, but we want it to be symmetrical enough that it doesn't feel like it's limping, right? So again, here on this side, I will go ahead and still... So that final location for that foot, right? Let's see here. So 25. It is select all. Let's go set my keyframes on that. Again, I'm going to sink her into that step a little bit more. Make her feel like that's absorbing that weight. Push her forward a little bit. I can go back here to see if I've pushed her down about the same amount. And I think I have. Feel like maybe she's a little further forward on that other side, and maybe even rotating forward a little bit. Go ahead and shift her weight over. And again, with this foot, I'm going to kind of push it back a little bit. Make it feel like she's kicking off. Toe kicking back. Right. And so now it's not going to limp quite as much, but we're still going to feel that pop, right? That like down pop, right? But it's not terrible. It's more like that pop up feels like too sudden, right? It's like she pops up and hits her head on something and then just stays flat for a while. So that brings us to our very last pose. Now, what is that? Okay. So what I'm going to tell you about this last pose is that like a lot of people leave it out. Like a lot of people just follow this process until they feel like, it's close enough, I'm done, right? Like this pose to pose process exists for a reason, and I would just encourage you to trust it. Like that you really do need all of these poses for your walk to look good. In fact, it's one of the things I'm looking for at midpoint review. Do I see evidence of all four of these key poses, right? So let's go ahead and put in our up pose. And really what this is going to do is it's going to clean up the arc of the hips, and it's going to give our character just a little bit of a higher place to push up to, right? So again, our up pose, characters all the way up on their foot. Some people will push the character up on the tiptoe. I think that's a little bit much for some walks. Sometimes it's necessary. And of course, this other leg is sort of like you're throwing it forward to try to catch yourself, right? So we got a lot of that, but the biggest thing is this needs to be the highest pose in our entire animation, right? So if that means you have to raise the foot just a little bit, you can. It's not absolutely necessary in most cases, but we'll do something like that. Push my character up really high. And then this foot here, kind of throwing it forward to get it out there in front of herself before she contacts the ground, right? So maybe a little something like that. So select everything, hit S. Okay. And again, it's going to feel a little limpy when we first see that. Right? But that just means we have to fix our other up pose. So again, S. I need to push her hips up as high as I can. Push that leg up just a little bit. Repeat it down. So she's pushing off that toe. Oh, it came off the ground. No. There we go. Right. And then I'm going to do a little bit more with his leg to push it up higher. Sort of drag it back a little bit. Right. And so now what we should have is it isn't too bad. Now we're getting a little bit of like slipping on the foot. And so some of that we need to tweak around with, right? But here's where this gets really kind of fun, I guess. Because as long as our first pose and our last pose is done, like is the same, I can make this cycle loop forever. I could literally make this character continue to walk forward until the end of time or until this computer crashes, whichever comes first. Oh, I hope it's the computer crash one. The trick to that is that like this is all still just curves, right? This is all still Maya generating a bunch of curves in the graph editor. And if we go in here and look in our graph editor, we can see those curves, right? If I go to animation, we can see translation, which is, this is on the character's foot. Translation X, that's the character's side-to-side foot motion, right? Translation Y, that's the character's up and down foot motion. Right? And all of these are curves that we can polish, and we should, right? Rotation on this, so we get a little bit of a weird little bobble in the rotation. But all of these are things that we can sort of tweak around and get that motion perfect, right? I want to show you like the hip motion. This is actually, I always think, a pretty good one. So our translate Y as our character is up and down on the hips. And so you should, if you sort of look from here to here, you should start to see a pattern, right? That it's like the character's hips are up for 2 frames and then down for 2 frames. And this one, it kind of eases up a little bit more, whereas this one, it didn't. And so that's one of the things we can do is we can go through here and sort of make those really subtle tweaks to make that make more sense, right? And so now the both of them are about the same height. But what it may have been is that maybe both of them were a little too high, right? If I don't want my character going up quite that high, I can just pull both of those curves down, right? So I get a lot of control with this just with the graph editor. The same with the character side-to-side hips. We should start seeing kind of a similar like pattern happening here. Forward and back, all of this stuff, we're going to start seeing patterns, right? If we don't see the pattern, then that means we forgot to edit one of those curves. Or maybe we forgot to push this one forward in the same way we did that previous one. Right? And so this is it, like, since this is a cyclical motion that is happening, these patterns need to be close to the same, right? So again, on this one, I kind of forgot to do a little bit of rotation on this. And so I can kind of even that out. Right? And so just by making these little tweaks, my walk cycle is going to feel a little bit better, right? But again, all of these are curves. Now the curve I want you to look at right now, though, is this translate Z. What is translate Z? I have the hips selected. Yes, Y is up and down. So you said moving forward. So yeah, it's actually the character moving forward. And the way you can tell that is it keeps getting higher, right? As the character moves forward, that curve continues to grow upward, right? So, let's just look at this in the graph editor to kind of understand what's happening here. If I were to grab all of these keys, right, and hit Control C, and then go out here to the end and hit Control V, it just moved my curve back down, but I have that same set of keys again right there, right? So really all I just did was copy and pasted those keys. However, if I were to go in here and select these, Control C, right? And then at the end of here, instead of just pasting it, if I use this Paste Connect, look what happens to that curve. It continues to go upward, right? In fact, I can do that forever. I can keep paste connecting to the end of this, and that curve will continue to go upward, right? Which means what's happening is my character's hips are continuing to go forward, right? So let's undo that. So what I'm actually going to do is my walk cycle section here, which is frame 10 through 34, I'm going to select all of those keys. Highlight all of those keys. I'm going to say right-click, copy. I have to be kind of careful with Control-C, Control-V because sometimes you'll accidentally copy and paste objects in here instead of keyframes, and that can really screw up your rig. But after I've copied them, I'm going to go out here to frame 34. And again, if I just right-click and say paste, it's just going to take my character back to the beginning, and then we're going to go back to there, and it's going to, I don't have my character's control rig selected, sorry. Let's do that again. From 10 through 34, I'm going to copy those. Now, if I go to frame 34 and just paste those, it will pull us back to that very first key pose on frame 34, right? So as soon as we get there, zoop, back to the beginning, right? So instead of pasting, what I'm going to do is right-click, paste, connect. And so now what's going to happen is my character is going to continue to walk forward, right? And if I paste, connect here again, continues to walk forward, right? So now I've got all 6 of my steps because I've pasted this twice. So I have 3 cycles that happen there. That's all 6 steps. And what we get with that is if we hit play, see my character kind of walking. Now we can still edit curves on this. Like for example, I notice my character is kind of raising her foot up kind of high there. Maybe that's a little higher than I want it to go. And so I can go in here and grab all of these peaks, pull that down just a little bit. Something else I may do is grab all of these peaks, pull it down just a little, right? So just get a little bit more of a change in that, right? So there's lots of different things we can do in this. We can still continue to edit those curves. What I'm going to do at the very end, though, is I'm just going to have my character sort of settle to a stop. So maybe over, let's say, frame 96, I'm just going to have her kind of get that last little bit of a step and sort of settle into being stopped, right? So go ahead and rotate that on her foot. Go ahead and move her forward. Go ahead and flatten that out a little bit. Just get her in a nice standing pose here, right? Something you may want to fix is that toe. And again, since we're doing that pose to pose method, that means she's just going to kind of go from her last step here and sort of blend into that pose. Now, that's not going to contain everything that I need it to. Like, I kind of want her to still do a little bit of a push off there and sort of settle into that pose. So again, I can sort of copy that, put it there. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. So just kind of give her a reason to sort of shift her weight over that foot. Fix that toe. I can even do, remember when we talked about follow through and overlapping action? So I could go ahead and get this foot completely on the ground by frame 91. But the rest of her, I could have kind of go past that pose and sort of settle back, right? So I could have her go like forward just a little bit, maybe like to this, kind of lower her head a little bit, right? So she kind of overshoots and then kind of settles back, right? And so all of this is what we're getting out of it, right? Now, I will say that I'm doing this kind of the fast way because, again, watching somebody else animate isn't always the most exciting thing in the world. What I would actually do in the real world is I would tweak a few things. Like, so one of the things that bothers me is I still feel like this foot is kind of going flat a little too quickly or a little too slowly. So right now it's taking about 3 or 4 frames for that to happen. I would grab that control and just shift that keyframe back just so that goes flat a little faster, right? Just little things like that. So every time the foot does that, there. And then there's one last one here. Right here. Something else that I notice is like that last little bit of something as right there, like the foot kind of pushes up to there, but never quite feels like it's really like pushing off the ground. So maybe I need to do a little bit of something like that. It also needs to just kind of push forward a little bit. So there's a lot of little meticulous things that I would kind of work on, right? So that's still not feeling exactly right. So there's a couple of little things you can do there. But just by tweaking with that, we're going to get just a little bit of a better result. So everybody has their own little way that they'll want to polish this. But once you're done, like this is it. Like this is the whole class, right? Is getting this project. So from here, I will tell you some of the things I'm watching for is like too much foot sliding, like where it feels like your feet are just kind of kicking against the ground and not feeling like they're like locked to the ground. I'm looking for that weight. I'm looking to see if you're actually using these key poses. because that shows me that you actually really care about getting good motion out of this. So again, I don't know if you're wanting to be animators or you're just in this class because it's a one of the principles classes you have to take. But those are the things that I'm going to prioritize, like sort of highly on the animation side. Once you're done with this, like I usually would say, let's create a camera. All right. Do just a little bit of camera motion on this. Maybe something like, I'm actually going to hide these blocks. Delete them. So, I think I've shown you this before, but if we click this little box with the blue dot in it, this will show me what my camera is actually going to be recording or showing. And so I could start somewhere like this, select my camera, and hit S. Go to the end of my animation. Get out here like this. Hit S. And so now I get this entire little animation stretch here of her walking forward. Like, it's ready to render. Like, I mean, I would have to put whatever environment pieces you want to put in there. And I'm pretty much done with the walk cycle. The video I posted earlier or on Friday about the skirt, that would be sort of an afterwards thing that I would do. So if I went back, right now I've just sort of skinned mine to the character, but following that video, instead of skinning it, using the simulation to let that drag behind, and that's pretty much how I would do the whole thing. So, any questions? Any comments? All right. So as I said, this is the last lecture for this class. Next class period will be work time. I'll be in here helping you put out fires, helping you figure out what's wrong with your rig, with your model, with your animation, or just giving you open feedback. After that, Friday, we're not actually having class because that's dead day. That is the day that you should maybe consider coming over to watch some of the portfolio reviews. And then Wednesday of next week is the final. So after that is summer break, and you can enjoy your summer. Any questions about anything regarding this class? Yes.
I just have
Michael,
I
yeah.
have personal.
Okay. Any big questions? Yes.
Where is the portfolio?
Oh, I'm not for sure the exact room, but it'll be over in the Millennium Center next door.
Will there be papers like there were last semester saying?
Yeah, I hung some up at midpoint saying, like, here's a guide to the room. I'll have to figure out which room that is before I can sort of make that paper. What I would say is usually just sort of walk along through there. We usually leave the door open and you can sort of peek in. It's been in two different places. One has been right there, like one of the first rooms you get to. It's like a big auditorium. We had it there one time, but usually it's on down past the elevators. It's like one of the first few rooms past the elevators. But yeah, I'll try to hang up that flyer again. If I get the flyer made earlier, I'll post it on Band as well. So,
What time?
so Thursday, it's going to be about 5:15 p.m. Till we get exhausted. Probably, I'm guessing probably 8 or 9. And then Friday, we're going to start at about 9:30. Yes.
Next week or this week?
Could you actually just post it on Band?
Yes, I'll post that. Yeah, that is definitely on my list of things to do is post those times. Just letting you kind of know Friday morning, Thursday night, basically. All right, cool.
I think you were talking about another midpoint review for the other students.
No, it's for it's the final portfolio, so it's like what the seniors are doing.
Okay, you have to know, like, it's gonna be there.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, where is it gonna be?
Over in the Millennium Center next door. Like, so there's the well, so we're those like double doors that are downstairs next to the bathrooms. Like when those are opened up, there's like a conference center.
Oh, you mean that conference center beside the place?
Yeah. So we'll have like a room rented out over there. That we can
You'll post which room on Band?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to. Yeah.
Alright.
If nothing else, look for signs. So.
Hey Greg, the 5 jobs thing, the paper, it's just
5 jobs that are hiring.
Five jobs that you think you'd be interested in, and maybe like a sentence explaining why you think you'd like it.
That's fine.
That reminds me, if you want to turn in revisions, I'm accepting those all the way up to the day of the final, basically. So feel free to continue to revise those.
So I've got the final in the folder. I mean, not the final, the revised bridge in the folder with the render and everything. I think I did the render correctly.
Okay.
But you're right. There is no folder. There's not even a folder for my name in the bottle on Baldwin. So the only thing I can say for that is either I was absent that day or I goofed.
Do you have it? No.
It's not completed.
You have something to turn in?
I do have something. Yeah, I had something that day.
Yeah. I know we did a walk around on that day, and we have what was it? Plug that into for the revisions folder because I'm not going to get my shit on.
I'll just go ahead and finish.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the last day, and I'll accept it. I may have to knock it a little bit on being on it.
I've got, like I said, I made the bottle and everything, and I made the ball. And the only thing that I didn't do was render it because I don't know what the reverse time basically. I'm rendering it on my own laptop.
Yeah, I would say fine.
I'll show you my bridge. My bridge turned out me.
Like, look for that.
I cannot figure out this freaking keyboard thing, 'cause, like, I did the painting thing, I thought I was doing it right, but, like, I moved it up, and it was doing that.
The only reason I have the IK handles is so it stays stuck on the ground. Otherwise, it's going to kind of swim around.
I don't know if I probably, I tried to do this. Because I tried doing icons with without the body joint kind of deal, and then with it, and then
Is it not bending?
Yeah, I don't know, it just doesn't do anything, and then, I can't see.
So maybe if these are perfectly straight.
So humble. Trapped on a mountain with limited front.
So you got have you ever skin this?
because I could then though, like, I figured if I didn't have this family, might be able to get away with it.
I would probably try the IK handles just because, like, otherwise when whenever you put them down, it's going to go to the floor. So you want to go there. The problem with that for me is just trying to see. It's like, so one of the problems with that is if you make these perfectly straight, like the joints perfectly straight, then it doesn't know which way to move. So if I go in here and have you save this? If I go in here and create an IT motion here, say here, right? Move it, it doesn't know which way. So let's try this before we do that. Let's just.
Yeah, so I should
Grab those
So
three.
you guys forget.
That sounds like what Clint would do.
the what?
Big
Yeah.
seat supposed to be.
No, it doesn't matter how long it is. You just need an animation.
As long as your cars go from one side of the bridge to the other, it don't matter.
Okay.
What's your boss?
Yes.
Create
I think we can.
No, that's something that's recorded.
Well, one second, so.
Oh, I didn't.
This is so magical.
Yeah.
We'll
Something.
take out the phone.
Well, you can't take out the phone. I think one of the reasons you're not getting the wind in there is why is that means
Where's the? Oh, there's something.
so I mean, the rig is still working. I think we just did.
It's like
and
sort of like mine's club.
now the rig isn't going to be deforming it, but it's still deforming that joint. So you can do that. So we just put a whole bunch more of these in here. Imagine
Sorry, it's red.
and so now if we just reskin this object to that. Now we're gonna get like different information. Yeah, so I mean, it's up to you if you want to take that one out. You can. What I usually do is when I'm building the routines, if you notice in the video, I create a little side view. But when I usually, when I create my logo, I create my head. And I try not to create it up too straight down.
I can't handle their spray cans.
And the reason for that is
Oh god.
That's pretty camera.
They wanted to get some color.
it's hard.
So they got like the cheap spray
If you don't know her needs for the picture,
Spray
if joints in there and just like it, probably get you.
Your dad, also glasses, also mustache,
Did the
whatever
skirt
other
make
thing
make
I am.
sense?
Yes.
And thank you for watching my camera.
Well, it's one things to do. Like, can she turn that into root control, to her hip control?
Because it's orange.
You do the
You
transfer.
look like Donald
transfer
Trump.
He's gonna make a joke
and
thing
then
on
pretty
it.
much wherever you need her.
He is. He's just angry Conchito. I really want to watch this movie, but I don't want to ruin my fiance's spot.
The rig is not really complicated. Sometimes you have to rig it multiple
But, like,
times.
I don't understand. Like, if you want to watch The Simpsons with me, it's like too.
So the problem with that character that twice is perfectly straight is that means unless it's going to deform, they can't move up and down because it would have to because it's deformed. So it's either have to squash when you go down or dip. Or your hair always stays the same height and you never go
It's
down.
only because I can't find it.
Yeah, I just like this.
Yeah.
But I was
The
like,
only thing that gets me
I figured I would do some kind of place.
is
So like,
So you could do something like that. I love that we get to do this when we're explaining something. You could do a little bit like a blob, so she's a little bit weighing on each leg. I think you'll still get a little bit more out of that if you have a little bit
They don't just do one or the other.
Both of those work, but the IK means you don't have to make sure you're doing that for every frame, so it's lining up.
And I'm just like, this is really hard to get on.
Cool.
Yeah.
Alright, so was there a minimum
Yes,
to how long
right.
this strategy is working on later?
How long?
Our video? Was there a minimum to it?
Which one?
Oh, working on this.
I don't think so. I think it was like,
I made the bridge myself project.
yeah, I'll have more revisions.
It's already in.
Awesome. No, I think I said somewhere between 5 to 10 seconds, but I think.
It's just it takes so long to render it. That's what I hate about animation.
Oh, but that's the thing. Rendering time is long.
mean, so
Old
never.
Simpsons.
Feels like we're falling
It said 30 years ago, and that's just kind of freaking me out a little bit.
Oh.
30 years ago.
Yeah, me
So
too,
it's like-
because
it's
I
like a
remember
week.
when this came out.
And I was
The
just saying,
Simpsons came out in the 80s.
well, yeah, but this is like a modern episode, and they're like doing a flashback,
Oh,
Yeah, they are.
really?
They are, yeah.
and that's kind of weird. I've seen a lot of the older ones, but
I can't wait to see what the voice actors and actresses sound like from 30 years ago. Because
it's not good.
they had different ones. Like,
I mean,
Marge.
Homer's like, okay, kids, we're gonna show you about the deep blue sea. I'm like,
Okay, kids, let's go and enjoy the, it's just like, it's kind of like the lame stuff with like home videos from like Adult Swim.
But I realized when The Simpsons first came out, it was part of another show.
oh, was it?
It was the Tracy Ullman show. And it was like a little skit that happened in the middle of it. That they would have these little like 10 or 5 minute like episodes, and then it got into a spin-off.
But the point of that was because the guy who did the artist, he wanted to be an animator, I think, but he wasn't allowed to because he was a movie actor or something. Or was he a director of like sitcom or something? I don't know. But there was some sort of like drama about it. Like someone wanted to do something and they weren't able to do it because people wouldn't get their product. They thought it was too absurd or aggressive or something like that. I like Married to Children. That was fun.
I am having some problems with, I think, the paint. So, like, I tried to paint it, right? So, like, let me click on
Don't paint everything. Don't do it. No.
So, and like, like it's the toe, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, that looks good, right? I'm like, okay. So I go here, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make the toe.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I think what you're doing is do you have the IK handle?
Yeah.
So grab the IK handle and move that.
I'm gonna hold it in my hand.
So try moving that up.
It was okay.
So it looks like the toe is painted correctly. It looks like the calf isn't. You want the calf to be painted to the knee.
I am having some trouble with the calf. Okay, so that's the problem. Is that
Yeah, your muscle system is wrong.
so I need to make that white?
Below that is yes. So I would just go and crank the value. Oh no,
Not that.
the part below the leg. So think of it.
So this needs to be white.
You're talking about
below the kneecap. I'm sorry.
below the kneecap. So
Like all that calf area down there needs to be
Oh, really?
white. And actually, you could probably do the foot too.
talk about it in bones and muscles and stuff. You don't know.
Just connect over it, I guess.
Hmm?
As a time,
What?
You may have.
Yeah, I know. Hold on.
tibia.
Why is that being so wonky? See it? It's like folding over. I'm struggling.
Yeah, I can push it. So for real.
You might want to reset it.
Maybe if I.
Can I sit there for a second? Can I show you
Yeah.
how I do it?
I know
Oh,
you
wait.
So the hard part about
Um,
painting zero is when you paint zero, that means it's going to distribute that way to another unit automatically.
Oh.
So here's what I usually do. Let's say you get your hip, right? So let's just go ahead and flood everything to your hip first.
Okay.
So I'm just going to turn all that way into one hip flood, right? And now the hip's rotation is going to control it.
He's a better teacher than you. I try.
Listen, Mom.
So now, whatever the this hip joint does,
No, it's not quite. It's not quite in the right place yet. It's a little sideways.
so that's on the hip.
No. I was wanting like this year.
Sorry.
I know
So
there's
whatever
a donkey
that hip joint
and a
does,
donkey.
The Zonky is highest level prestige. Reserved for
the
hackers.
whole thing is going to do.
Ooh.
stuff to get that like bend and the knee too.
Because I mean, that's how you walk.
Are you gonna make it do like the can?
goes as fast as the
So
but it has like no control whenever you're
we get that going. Right? The lower part of the leg,
really
I
fast.
can then paint to this next joint down.
Gotta go fast.
Yeah,
So I'm just gonna start painting that part white.
You like can't.
So that means the upper leg is still being controlled, but now also remember you can hold on B.
Oh, what do you? Okay. Okay. Okay.
So just kind of add the weight in this part here.
Why is it doing the thing?
What did I do? Did all the
Oh, I'll show you.
What do you?
Literally played it perfectly. There's nothing I could have done.
Ooh, friend. She boxy.
For girl. Fritz. Watch the streamers look.
Oh, wow, that's right today. Look.
This guy's dick is insane. I literally played that.
And then I usually will hold down shift. We hold down shift. That'll sort of smooth in between these two. Average that. So, right?
Yeah.
So then you can kind of. Now here's something that's I've kind of screwed up though because I don't know where that actually originated
It's in
goes.
like Sweden.
So I would probably say this. I don't know where this IK is. Right here.
It's a non-canon.
What exactly is
universe
it?
where everyone happens
It
to
wasn't.
play.
No, it was slightly adjusted.
Maybe
I mean, you can just get close to it.
Yeah. Then I'll be changing anyway when she's walking.
Okay.
So that would be once you get that, then.
Yes, well, people literally ask that question on the internet.
So the way to look at it is when you select over here,
There's no representation.
you're selecting R hip, and it should turn it blue. So that joint is your R hip. The area that is white, those vertices are going to be deformed by that joint.
Gotcha.
The areas that are black, those are not. And so something has to be controlling them. So it's either going to be your knee, foot,
And the toe.
and the toe is sort of around for the
Because she's
ride.
such a weird
Yeah,
foot.
she doesn't really have a toe that much. You probably have a little bit on there, so you rotate.
That's not.
It's from adults. A robot should
Do
do
like a tip of the heel.
Maybe it doesn't even rotate. So like a lot out of that.
What did you say?
But then the knee is. So are you wanting your like toe to be able to wiggle a little bit?
I mean, it kind of naturally picks up at an angle,
Yeah.
so I wasn't really playing with it too much. You know what I mean? It was kind of doing it by itself.
It looks like a cow.
You like almost
Thank
your dad
Thank
never
you.
said.
Is that a bad thing?
No, it's kind of confusing.
No, I think you're. Sorry, I think that's good though.
Okay, so just do that with the other leg.
Next step.
Okay, and what do I do with like the upper things? Do I just make it all black? Like, I'm generally
I think
confused.
it kind of does.
Yeah, most people are. I would say the upper body.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably not.
So your call. If you wanted to make more joints up through here, so you could make those move, you could.
I would totally
Make
do
that
that.
head move, but otherwise you could just paint all of this and just flood that to your middle joint, which looks like you already have. Just flood that.
So you want it to be white?
Yeah, white means it's controlling it completely. Black means it's not controlling it.
Okay, so it won't. Will it get deformed though when it walks if it's all white?
It won't. It will do that.
Okay, that doesn't look too bad.
Yeah, her head is doing the stretchy thing, and that means some other things are affecting that. I'm not sure what, but you get float on that. But if you're doing her spine to bend, what you'll need is like another joint right up through here to make it curve. Does it make sense? So you have to put more joints above that too, and skin, and probably detach the skin. The skin is the joints.
You should make like the little bitty bowl ties, like
Mm-hmm.
Like, as it is right now, its foot is actually moving how I want it to, but as you can see, it's not moving like
Yeah, so probably what you'd want to do is on the belly part, you would want to flood that weight to your root. So you want it, if you want it to stay the same, it's like this. And then for that, top of the cover. Yeah, if you wanted to curl the tail, you have to put some corners right there in it too. I think it's alright. Like, is it going to be like a double-footed hop? Or is it like 1 foot at a time, like kind of a thing? It would be a little bit more like a walk that way. And so I'll probably try that if I could. Just that way you can get the right shift, and it'll be a little bit more like. So to do that, you would need to add another train. That's one way of doing it. The other way you can do it is it's kind of what Sierra's doing. Is like you're putting those extra joints up through the body. You would just put one up there for the head. You could even put one out in the ears and get the ears to get some wiggle or something if you wanted to as well. And that'd be the same with the tail. You could extend those out to the tail with extra joints. So what you would do is, after you create them, you would unskin the head object and then reskin them to those new joints. Does that make sense?
A person's leg, especially the part from the knee to the ankle, so
Okay.
it has the shank.
Shank.
Because it locks it.
Yeah. How about I go about it?
No shank allowed.
Also,
So there's several things. The door is a separate piece. So can you get back to your bind pose, like the original pose you first started?
I've shanked a shot.
So if you
hit that first
unskin
one,
that, what is the problem? Is it just stay in the same spot?
slashes back.
Yeah, just like the door.
Yes. You didn't know how you were right. You just said I was wrong. You were right.
No, I knew that a shank was not a piece of somebody. I knew that it was a leg. Because of the leg of shank.
And now is that rotating where you want it
Do you
to?
really want to do
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
So what you can do is instead of skinning it, you just need to go with the object, right? So you can choose the control,
So the lap shank is like
choose the door. And then go constrain.
Yeah.
When you do it that way, the other way that's going to work better is just a little quick drag your door and control it.
you wouldn't need that.
Like I'm so hungry.
I'm not sure you go with it now,
That it's
but you'd be able to make it the door itself.
Yeah.
Well, you've just been sitting here setting down and going over your leg.
I said, yes. You were. We argued about shit.
Oh, yeah. That was probably because you freeze the transforms.
I never
Freeze your weights.
Ever.
Freeze your,
I would never say something.
yeah, freeze transforms. And so that was me. It was thinking about the original shape of it, and when you rotate
Holy
it,
bread. Remember that meeting?
Shut up.
Say, had the character stop. That way, you can use the style.
POA. Check with me on Wednesday if working the way I sound like it should, and I can show you trainings as a driver. Yeah, that's fine. Whatever's good for you. You want to survive as
Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Look at him go.
So if you go through the main factory door, not the last door, but the second door there, you go in and the first one. Hey, we should put name. I used to have a name tag on my door. I don't remember that. Hey, I bet I'm still recording this video, aren't I? Hey, I am.
Because I had a Maya
Sorry.
fail. So I just went to the last stage
Stop
of my house.